Hey guys, just a little intro here. This is a spoiler video going over some of the spoilers that were given during the stream the other day. There were literally like 30 or so cards, so we're not covering them all in this video. We're going to be covering a cycle of cards. By the way, for those of you who don't know, a cycle is a type of card which appears in multiple factions where they're very similar. Intentionally so. We're going to call this the adaptive cycle because each of the cards are characters called adaptive blank, and there's one for each faction. Each of them features the overcharge mechanic, which is in oppression, which allows you to remove a card from your hand from the game for some kind of effect. Each of these characters, when you deploy them, you remove a card from your hand from the game if you want the additional effect. Just to make it clear, removing a card from your hand from the game is a huge cost. However, removing a card from your hand from the game is an option, and options are power because you can choose. You don't have to do it if it puts you at a disadvantage, but sometimes it will be advantageous and you will be happy that you have that option there. So let's move on to the very first one. Alright, the first card we're looking at is Adaptive Brute, which is for Cult of Veror. It is a 4-cost character. It is an 8/10. An 8/10, I would say, is fairly mediocre stats at cost 4. I would say an 8/10 is like a 3.5 resources, probably? I don't know. But if you do not overcharge this card, it is meh. It's okay. It's not terrible. But if you do overcharge it, it does 6 damage to the opponent's fortress, which is also like, I don't know if it's okay. But here's the thing. Let's say that this card is, a 3.5 resource-ish card. That means you're wasting 0.5 resources plus a card in your hand for the extra 6 damage, which is questionable. But looking at Anger of Veroria, which is a 2-cost ability, which causes the opponent to lose 10 health and deal 10 damage to your fortress. I think that getting what you're doing is you're transforming a card into your hand, and by that I mean the card in your hand turns into a 0-cost card that says deal 6 damage to your opponent's fortress. Compared to Anger of Veroria, that's 60% of an Anger of Veroria where you don't have to lose any health for your fortress, and it doesn't cost any resources. That sounds pretty good. My only jam with the card is that it's for Cult of Veror, which is a very control-heavy faction, and the effect on this card is very aggressive. However, you can splash Cult of Veror for this, and maybe you use the rest of the deck as Flame Dawn, who knows? It seems okay to me. Next, we're looking at Adaptive Construct, which is for Genesis Industries, costs 2, and it is a 6/6. It is artificial, which will synergize with Genesis stuff, and when you overcharge it, it gets +2/+2. This card's not particularly interesting other than the fact that it's a straight upgrade to Drone, which is identical in every respect, including morale costs and purity, stats, everything. But Adaptive Construct gives you the additional option to overcharge it to give +2/+2. So whether or not Adaptive Construct is good or not, it is a straight upgrade to Drone. So if you're using Drone in any deck, Adaptive Construct should replace it without a thought. There is never a time where having the option to overcharge it will hurt you. Because if you don't want to overcharge it, it's straight up Drone. I don't know any scenario where Drone would be superior to this. So, I don't know, why not? Use this. Next one we are looking at is also a 2-cost artificial character, this time for the Overseers. 6/6 as well. And when you overcharge it, it heals your fortress for 10. This seems really nice because if your fortress hasn't taken damage, you don't have to overcharge it. You just plop it down, and a 6/6 for 2 is not bad. It's pretty good. And if you're in a pinch, 10 health for 0 cost. And I'm going to use this comparison a lot of times. Would you play a 2 mana 6/6, 2 resource 6/6 that transforms a card in your hand into a 0 cost, gain 10 health? I would. Seems really good to me. Interestingly enough, this is Adaptive Drone, and the other one's Adaptive Construct. Don't get those confused. It's easy because Drone is the 2-cost 6/6 for Genesis Industries, but Adaptive Construct is the 2-cost Overcharge 6/6 for Genesis Industries, and Adaptive Drone is not. Adaptive Drone is for Overseers. Not a big deal. I'm being nitpicky. I think the card's good. I think it's better for a slower deck, or a deck that is trying to just outrace your opponent, I guess. It's not as aggressive as a lot of the other adaptive cards because it doesn't have an immediate battlefield presence when you overcharge it, but it's definitely good anyways for putting a little gas back in the tank. Alright, we're now looking at Adaptive Hulker for Warpath, a 4-cost 9/9 beast, which of course will help you for your Warpath beast decks. But my first reaction when seeing this card is in the same cost slot we have access to Brown Bear. Same cost, actually costs 1 less morale, which is a tiny bonus, but it has 4 more health. If you play Adaptive Hulker and you do not overcharge it, it is way worse than Brown Bear. So if you're running Adaptive Hulker in your deck, you have to be saying, when you're putting it in the deck, I plan on overcharging this more often than I don't. Because if you don't overcharge it all that much, then you should just be using Brown Bear, which is the same thing, but doesn't cost you a card in the hand to put it up to reasonable stats. However, if you do overcharge this guy, he has, let's see, compared to Brown Bear, 5 more attack and 1 more health. So you're adding +5/+1 by dropping a card from your hand. Is that worth it? Definitely sometimes when you need that extra tempo, but I don't know. I honestly, I think this is one of the weaker ones because does it really help that much relative to how much a card in your hand might help? Circumstantially, definitely, but you're trading reliability, which is Brown Bear, for versatility, which is Adaptive Hulker. If you like versatility, Adaptive Hulker might be your man. But if you want to rely on not having to drop cards to get the best bang for your buck, Brown Bear's the way to go. Moving on. So, unlike Adaptive Hulker, Adaptive Master for Descendants of the Dragons, 3-cost 7/7, does not fall short when compared to the stats of other 3-drops in Descendants of the Dragons, largely because most of the 3-drops for Descendants of the Dragons are utility cards. There are very few guys that you can just plop down and expect to be a body with health and power, where, you know, for Warpath, you've got plenty of those. So Adaptive Hulker doesn't seem like it really fulfills much of a role. But Adaptive Master, if I'm just looking for dudes to put in the deck, this guy's not a bad dude at the cost of 3, and you can remove a card from your hand to make him a bigger dude. I think that's pretty good, because you can't necessarily rely on having just utility cards at the cost of 3. You do have a couple of cost 3 dudes for Descendants of the Dragons. I'm coining the term dude to refer to a guy that's just supposed to sit on the battlefield and beat people up or get beat up, you know, on the other end of the spectrum. For cost 3, there's a lot of unique characters, but the closest thing you get to like an actual dude is probably gotta be Warden of the Wall or Inspiring Soldier, which both are not that different in stats. Inspiring Soldier's is 7-8, so has 1 more health, but of course doesn't have that option to get even more health. So I think that Adaptive Master does have a place in Descendants of the Dragons as your go-to, I want a guy on the board on turn 3, dude man. So the next couple ones are really my favorites because they fulfill a new sort of niche for their factions, which weren't necessarily had before. First, we're going to look at Adaptive Ritualists, a 3-cost The Exiles card. He is a demon, like I've been saying previously, that is beneficial for the Exiles. He is an 8-8, which is pretty fair stats for a 3-cost card for the Exiles. I'd say it's about average for them, but you can overcharge it to put a card from your graveyard back into your hand, and that's very different than these other overcharge cards, which most of them you're trading for stats. Actually, I take that back. Not some of them you trade for stats, some of them you trade for utility, but this guy, you are trading 1 card for 1 card. That's really good, because you lose nothing. You don't have to do this if there's garbage in your graveyard, but what you can do is you can get a card from your hand that is less useful and trade it for a card that's more useful immediately. That's insanely good. You should do that. This is a great swap, and he's actually got reasonable stats. If you ask me, he's got to be... I'm going to compare him to the next one. The next one's also really good, but this one might be my favorite. I think it might be the best of them because it brings so much to the table. You're not losing a card. That's a huge deal because the drawback to overcharging is you're losing a card. This doesn't lose you a card. This is a card for a card. Would you trade a dollar for a dollar? I mean, you don't lose anything. What if their dollar is shinier? I don't know. Maybe they have a nicer looking dollar. Who knows? You get what I'm saying. It's equivalent exchange. Equivalent exchange where you get to choose what's coming out of it. This is a great tool, and I would use it in any kind of deck that uses the Exiles. It seems perfect to me. All right, that's enough rant about that. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, the final card we're going to be looking at is Adaptive Scout, which is a 1-cost 4/4 for Flame Dawn. A 4/4 in Flame Dawn is pretty on par with other characters of that cost. We're going to be comparing it to Flame Dawn Footman, which is a 5/4, so you're missing out on 1 power if you do not overcharge this card. However, if you do overcharge it, you're getting +3, which is 2 more power than a Flame Dawn Footman, which, if you're looking for an extremely aggressive early start, might be the better choice. Better than Flame Dawn Footman. So this card fills a new role of being the best, or well, I don't know about best, but heaviest hitter for turn 1 that actually has a presence on the battlefield the whole time. The other thing worth noting is when you get into later in the game, when a 1-cost character isn't as relevant, this character, first of all, is more relevant than a 1-cost character, but also you can overcharge and get rid of some other 1-cost character. So if you're later in the game, you might have a Flame Dawn Footman and a Flame Dawn Footman in your hand, or you might have an Adaptive Scout and an Adaptive Scout. And in the Adaptive Scout scenario, you can opt to put down a stronger guy. So I think this is a really great option for Flame Dawn. I would definitely consider running it just because it gives you the chance to go as deep, as heavy damage possible early, and lets you not suffer as much later in the game for running those low-cost characters. Alright, so that's all we have to talk about today, because I don't have enough time to discuss the 1.5 million cards that are getting released. Also keep in mind that these cards are still in limbo. They may or may not be changed. We'll have to wait and see. Hope to see you guys all next time. I'm looking forward to it. Peace out.